Chapter 6. The Song of Solomon and the Book of Jasher. The Song of Solomon. I have compared the "O my love" to a company of horses in Pharaoh's chariots. Song of Solomon 1:9. It is very apparent that not every chapter or verse in the Bible is worthy of being called scripture. Bible students usually consider scripture to be inspirational, prophetic, moral, or the law of God. On this basis, there is one book in the Bible that is certainly questionable: the Song of Solomon, which is found between Ecclesiastes and Isaiah. This is a song or poem about Solomon, possibly even written by him. This biblical book contains nothing of a religious, spiritual, or moral nature. Rather, it depicts a dialogue between a man and woman, expressing their thoughts in a carnal love affair. Since there is nothing uplifting or religious in this book, we can only wonder why it was included with the other manuscripts. Indeed, this book does not even mention God, heaven, or righteous principles. From a commentary in the PTL Television Network Bible, it is written, as to its literary genre, the Song of Solomon is obviously a poem of love. The difficulty is how to interpret it. Page 616. But there seems to be no interpretation about it. Nothing indicates that it was written for an interpretation, but rather it is a literal story of a Shulamite girl whom Solomon takes to the palace, and despite his advances, she remains faithful to her beau, or husband. For 8 whole chapters, this man and woman talk about their romantic affections for each other. The contents of this book appear strange, if not even humorous, to the people of our modern society. For example, the first chapter contains a verse of erotic jargon saying, "He shall lie all night betwixt my breasts." The meaning of this is quite clear. Their description of each other is something else. In this same chapter, Solomon tries to portray her character, but it is difficult to determine whether it is by flattery or sarcasm. He says to her, "Thy hair is as a flock of goats, thy teeth are like a flock of sheep, thy temples are like a piece of pomegranate, thy neck is like the tower of David builded for an armory, thy 2 breasts are like 2 young roes which feed among the lilies." A girl of today may not consider these as compliments. Solomon's lady friend responds in a similar fashion, or in retaliation, by saying, "His eyes are the eyes of doves washed with milk. His cheeks are as a bed of spices. His belly is as bright ivory, overlaid with sapphires. My beloved put his hand by the hole of the door, and my bowels were moved for him." Solomon continues with another series of lush narratives. "Thy navel is like a round goblet, which wanteth not liquor. Thy belly is like a heap of wheat. Thy nose is as the tower of Lebanon which looketh toward Damascus. Thy stature is like to a palm tree, and thy breasts to clusters of grapes." Then Solomon makes his final passionate bid. "Let us get up early to the vineyards. Let us see if the vine flourish, whether the tender grape appear, and the pomegranates bud forth. There will I give thee my love." Song of Solomon 7:12. With words like that, he may have thought no girl could refuse. Whatever the outcome, it makes one realize that the English language is certainly an improvement over ancient Hebrew. It is interesting to note Reverend Jim Bakker's commentary on the Song of Solomon. "Nowhere in all of literature is there a more beautiful expression of human love." This certainly reveals the lack of reading material in his library. The Jewish rabbis say this book might possibly be interpreted to be a relationship between God and his chosen people. The Christian ministers today think it may represent a relationship between Christ and his church. If these are the interpretations we get from the clergy, we should certainly question their explanations of the rest of the Bible. On the other hand, when the prophet Joseph Smith read this book, he quickly concluded there was nothing in it that should be considered scripture. Therefore, he properly and wisely omitted the entire Song of Solomon from his inspired translation of the Bible. When we contemplate how our modern ministers accept such works as the Song of Solomon as scripture, then it is no wonder God sent a prophet such as Joseph Smith to help the people out of such dilemmas. The Book of Jasher. Many books named in the Old Testament have been classed as missing or lost amid the many revolutions, wars, and migrations occurring in Judah's history. These books are not included in the canon of Jewish and Christian scripture because they have never been seen or heard of since the time of their writing. The Book of Deuteronomy was lost for a long time, but eventually found its way back among the sacred manuscripts. The Book of Jasher is mentioned twice in the scriptures. "And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies." Is not this written in the Book of Jasher? Joshua 10:13. "Also he bade them teach the children of Judah the use of the bow. Behold, it is written in the Book of Jasher." 2 Sam 1:18. Some of the Hebrew scholars believed that it contained the lives of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, and some of the other patriarchs. Dr. Lightfoot thought it was the Book of the Wars of God. The scholar Grotius thought it was a poetic book. Josephus wrote that by this book are to be understood certain records kept in some safe place on purpose, giving an account of what happened among the Hebrews from year to year, and called Jasher, or the Upright, on account of the fidelity of the annals. Antiquities of the Jews, by Flavius Josephus. Several books have turned up over the past few centuries, which were thought to have been the Book of Jasher, but many of them were eventually proved to be forgeries or fabrications. One particular manuscript, however, has been discovered which perhaps has much more authentic value than any of the others. The scholar Dr. Horn made reference to a book called Jasher, written in rabbinical Hebrew, which was said to have been discovered in Jerusalem at its capture under the Roman general Titus, AD 69. It was first printed in Venice, Italy, in the year 1613. It has since been published in English, and copies are available from the Bible Corporation of America in Philadelphia, copyrighted in 1954. The preface of this edition states, long prior to the destruction of Jerusalem, the Jews had established themselves in various parts of Spain and Italy. They traded to the Bay of Gibraltar, as historians affirm, in the earliest periods of history, and Basnage mentions that in Sagunto, a town in Spain, a tombstone was discovered, bearing the following inscription in the Hebrew language. This is the tomb of Adoniram, an officer of King Solomon, who came to collect the tribute and died the day. There can be no doubt that Spain, probably France and Italy, were tributary to Solomon. It is, however, certain that the Jews carried with them into Spain, on their dispersion, an immense number of manuscripts and sacred rolls, where they remained many years and were, in the 11th century, placed in their great college at Cordova, and from thence were conveyed to Venice on the first discovery of printing. The printer's Hebrew preface to Jasher shows that it was a painful transcript from a very old and almost illegible Hebrew record, and printed by and with the consent of the great consistory of rabbis at Venice, who alone had the power of publishing such works from the Hebrew records, as they deemed authentic. Preface, pages VI. The publisher explains that whatever may have been written and published by commentators, relative to the fabrications of Jasher, I am persuaded they had no reference to this work. The contents of this edition of Jasher are comparable to other writings of the Old Testament. The history, story, and ethics corroborate those of the ancient writers, and thus correspond with what has been written in the books of Joshua and 2 Samuel. It also records the history of the beginning of mankind, and then elaborates in more detail some of the other history as written in the books of Moses. The reasons for Cain's rebellion against his brother were made more clear, and information is given about Cain's wife accompanying him into the land of Nod. From Jasher, the definition of the word Nod has been given to move or wander about. It also mentions Cain's family. This book also declares that the art of writing was known, and that some things were written on stone. There is a more detailed account of the flood and of Noah's conduct. When Noah had finished preaching to the wicked, God caused the whole earth to shake and the sun darkened, and the thunder roared, and God did this mighty act in order to terrify the sons of men, that there might be no more evil upon earth. And still the sons of men would not return from their evil ways. About 700,000 men and women came to the ark, and as the waters prevailed over the earth they said to Noah, "We are ready to return to the Lord. Only open for us that we may live and not die." And Noah answered them saying, "Behold, now that you see the trouble of your souls, you wish to return to the Lord. Why did you not return during these 120 years, which the Lord granted you as the determined period? But now you come and tell me this on account of the troubles of your souls. Now also the Lord will not listen to you, neither will he give ear to you on this day, so that you will not now succeed in your wishes." Book of Jasher 6:21-23. They came to the ark again prepared to destroy it, but the wild animals stood around the ark, and began to overpower them and drove them off. There is also more detail into the genealogy of the descendants of Shem, Ham and Japheth. More is related on the life and character of Enoch, and the separation of both families and the earth in the days of Peleg. There are 40 verses pertaining to Enoch and his city. A description is included of the Lord's anger when mankind mixed races and animal species in abomination before the Lord. It described men who desired no responsibility for children, and had their wives drink a draught that would render them barren. This was a trespass against God, and to transgress the commandments which he had commanded to Adam, to be fruitful and multiply. The story of Abraham destroying the idol gods of his father, and his explanation of why he did it, is a classic piece of religious history, but perhaps nothing written about Abraham compares to the piety, dignity and human affection of this father to his son, and the willing obedience of Isaac to his father. The story of Abraham's and Isaac's sacrifice is so exquisitely described that the heart of him who can peruse the narrative without being deeply affected must be callous indeed. One can only imagine what Abraham felt as he approached to build the altar in that place, and Abraham was weeping. After explaining to Isaac the reason for the sacrifice, that faithful young man replied, "O my father, as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, there is nothing in my heart to cause me to deviate either to the right or to the left from the word that he has spoken to thee." Yet, when Abraham heard the words of Isaac, he wept, and Abraham's tears gushed down upon Isaac his son, and Isaac wept bitterly, and he said to his father, "Hasten thou, O my father, and do with me the will of the Lord our God, as he has commanded thee." And the hearts of Abraham and Isaac rejoiced at this thing which the Lord had commanded them. But the eye wept bitterly, whilst the heart rejoiced. Book of Jasher 23:63-64. Jasher gives more details in the life of Joseph, who was sold into Egypt, and his affairs with Potiphar's wife, Zilica. He adds much about the years he spent in prison and his triumph in Egypt, which are not contained in the biblical account. There is also more recorded about the history of the children of Israel under Moses. Certain passages in the book of Samuel were obscure, but Jasher clears these up, thus increasing the credulity of the book. Also included in this book are many parables and fanciful tales, to effect moral and religious purposes. Yet everything that is written in Jasher is similarly found in the Bible, but Jasher's descriptions are more descriptive and detailed. A few scholars have examined the manuscript and have made these comments. University of New York, April 10, 1840. I have compared a large portion of the translation of the Book of Jasher with the original Hebrew, and find it faithfully and elegantly rendered into English. The Hebrew itself is of a very pure character. Isaac Nordimer, Prof. of Oriental Literature, April 14, 1840. Kingston, Jamaica. I am acquainted with the Book of Jasher, having read a considerable part of it while in the hands of the translator in England. The Hebrew is very purely written, and the translator is an eminent scholar and has done it ample justice. It is full of interest throughout, and breathes a pure spirit of piety and religion, and I am satisfied that this is the first English translation ever made of that work. The Royal Asiatic Society at Calcutta, never having completed the translation of their copy as anticipated. 1. V. Nathan, Minister of the English and German Synagogue, taken from the preface to Book of Jasher, by J. H. Perry and Company, Salt Lake City, Utah, 1887. The Book of Jasher, like all other ancient writings, has suffered from liberties taken by scribes and translators, who sought to change or improve the manuscript for the benefit of its readers. There is also reason to believe that many apocryphal additions were made as well. These inserted elaborations were traditional and characteristic of the Jewish people, as they loved to embellish their favorite stories. However, the merit or fault can easily be accepted or glossed over without harm to the facts of its history. It is clearly shown to be a record of antiquity, containing much valuable information. The prophet Joseph Smith purposely neglected to put the Song of Solomon in his inspired translation of the Bible, while on the other hand, he spoke favorably of the Book of Jasher. At least on one occasion, he quoted from it as a valid historical document. He also published a statement about its publication in New York Times and Seasons 127. The prophet once stated that the Book of Jasher, which has not been disproved as a bad author, must have merit as an historical work. TPJS, page 260. How great the difference between the Song of Solomon and the Book of Jasher. The former is without history, it lacks inspiration or moral instruction, and it fails to even mention God or his laws and commandments. The Book of Jasher, on the other hand, coincides with the Bible, beginning with the creation of the earth, and continuing up to the children of Israel being led out of Egypt. It is a continuous history of God's dealings with man. It contains God's commandments and his laws, it corroborates the stories as recorded in the Bible, and it reveals further information and spiritual incidents in the lives of the great patriarchs and prophets of the Old Testament. How ironic that the Song of Solomon, which certainly lacks inspiration, is included in the Bible, and the Book of Jasher, which is edifying and historically valuable, has been omitted. Is this another evidence of the failings and faults of the biblical scribes and compilers, as they handled the words of God?